Welcome back to Live from Occupy City Hall. This is episode 4. My name is Leslie Roth. I'm a member of the May 30th Alliance, and today we're going to take some time to talk about the importance of information. On the first episode of Live from Occupy City Hall, I spoke about the recent shooting of Trey Bowman by the Rockford Police Department, which took place on September 24th, 2022. In that episode, I said that I would give the name of the officers which had recently been released who were involved in the shooting, and I made the mistake of not doing that. So I want to give that information out to the people watching this now, and then I want to use that information to precipitate a longer conversation about the importance of information. Jordan Austin is the name of the officer who shot Trey Bowman in the back. And Jacob Ditzler is the name of the other officer who was on the scene who tased Trey Bowman from the front, from what our reports coming out right now are saying. Initially, after a shooting takes place, after an officer-involved shooting takes place, there are specific pieces of information that the state's attorney, that the Winnebago Boone Integrity Task Force, that the Rockford Police Department themselves, that the city of Rockford government keep to themselves. There's, whether it be body camera footage, whether it be dash camera footage, whether it be the name of the officers, the name of the victim, any particulars about what took place in the events leading up to the shooting. And they keep those pieces of information to themselves as a form of power, because in politics, and that is what this is, when you are shot by the police, it begins a political game that is played by the city government, by the Rockford Police Department, because they have contracts where they bargain about what happens when these shootings go on. There are different things they want certain narratives that they want to go out. They don't want this story to become big or a national story. And so these are all political things. And in the midst of these political things happening, there are people's lives who are in the balance. There are people's children and loved ones whose lives hang in the balance. There are people who are psychologically traumatized by all these political tricks and political ploys that are played. And the anchor of those ploys is information. And that's one of the reasons that you hear people calling for transparency, and you hear city governments and police departments talking about transparency, but they can never truly give you transparency, because part of the power that they have is to be able to put a veil up, is to make things not be transparent, is to keep certain information to themselves that you don't have. And I think that no specific event highlights that as much as an officer-involved shooting. Whether it be how many officers there are there on the scene, the way they push people back. I was at a recent shooting, at the shooting of Trey Bowman, and as I was there outside the area that it happened, filming and communicating live, the police officers came and they pushed me back. And that's something that has commonly happened when people gather at a scene after officer-involved shooting. They're pushed back, and they're pushed back in an effort to, and not in an effort to have transparency with the community, but in an effort to begin to separate the officers involved at the scene from the community. And when separation exists, transparency can never exist. I think that that's maybe one of the things I want to make sure to highlight. As we talk about the importance of information, as we talk about the importance of having access to information, I think it's also important to talk about releasing information and the different ways in which you can release information that can make people more likely or less likely to receive the information. And so one of the reasons that they don't release the body camera footage immediately and the dash camera footage immediately is because they want to separate people's attention At the initial moment, the first 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours after an officer involved shooting is when there is the most attention on it locally, and if it's no attention on it locally, there's not going to be attention on it nationally. And so they want to let that attention die down before they show people what happened. They don't want people to hear what's happened and then be able to see what's happened in such a close proximity. In the places in which that has occurred, you can see that it was a building up of pressure, building up of some type of leverage and exerting of leverage from communities that have made officers release footage, or institutions, the police departments release footage, or the city of governments release footage. And then there's also when the institution, whether it be the city government or the state's attorney or the police department, depending on what city you are in, because now I'm taking it a little bit outside of Rockford, just talking about as a whole. If they believe that the footage criminalizes the person who is the victim bad enough, if they believe that it won't draw any empathy or sympathy, then they'll release the footage immediately, and quickly then, because then they don't want people to think that it's worse than it really is. You see, that's the delicate balance between hearing about something and seeing something, because sometimes you can hear about something and you can think that it's bad, and then you can see it and it's way worse than you could have imagined. But then on the other hand, sometimes you can hear about something and you can think that it's real bad, and then you see it and it's not as bad as you imagined. And so those are the type of psychological, political games that are at play. The same thing is true for other information, such as the name of the officers involved in the shooting and the name of the victim of the shooting. They want to wait as far out as possible from the initial incident happening to release those things, because they believe that there's power in those things being released. As I spoke about in the first episode, the name of the officer who shot Tyrus Jones was given to us because his wife was bragging at a baseball game about the shooting. And so we gave that name over to the family, and the family decided to release that name on a independent media form, and then social media began to run and put pictures of the officer out. And so it forced the hand of the state's attorney at the next press conference to say that this was the officer who was involved in the shooting. And actually, I think they put out a press release, but it forced their hand to do that. And again, you can only get that. You can only be able to do that when you have access to that information. And that's one of the things that's important about rising the consciousness in a community and in a city, is that people, you never know who can have access to what information or who may end up having access to what information. But if you can display to people the importance of that information, then when they get access to it, they can be more comfortable with releasing it. And so somebody had to get information about the officer involved in the shooting and then be comfortable enough to release that information to us. And then the same thing, we had to be comfortable enough to release that information to the family, and then the family had to be comfortable enough to release that information to the community and to the city as a whole. And that is how these things have to work. And one of the and sort of getting away from the subject but still staying on subject is finding creative ways to relay information. And so one portion of information is connected to an event happening in the moment. That's sort of like present information about things that are presently taking place. But I also think it's important to have access and to release and to gather information about things that have happened in the past, so that way they can help to inform you about things that are going on in the present. It's one thing to get information about what's going on right now, or what happened maybe 3 months ago or 6 months ago, or what may happen in 3 months. But the vantage point and the perspective you have on that information can do a 180-degree change when you get information about what went on 3 years ago, or what went on 13 years ago, or what went on 33 years ago, or what went on 63 years ago. because when they say history repeats itself, it's because life moves in cycles. And when you can understand the cycles that take place, when you can begin to understand why the cycles take place, when you can begin to see these cycles take place and occur, you can start to analyze the causes of them, the root causes, instead of just looking at the effects. We are in a time in history, specifically in the city of Rockford, Illinois, where everything that you are seeing in the present time is an effect. It's an effect of things that were put in place more than 3 months ago, more than 3 years ago, more than 30 years ago. And so many people are not willing to take the time to get the information about the things that did happen 3 years ago or 13 years ago or 30 years ago. And that is a mistake. And that especially when you are dealing with institutions and dealing with issues that have existed for longer than 3 years or longer than 13 years or longer than 33 years. If you're trying to fight an issue that has existed for hundreds of years and you only know what has happened in the last 10 years, you're not going to be able to adequately face that issue. And so here in Rockford, Illinois, we took the time to become informed about what had happened here 5 years ago with officer involved shootings, and 10 years ago, and 15 years ago, and 20 years ago, and 30 years ago, and 40 years ago. And one of the ways that we have presented that information that we have gathered to the city has been through putting some of these memorials up that we have outside of the city hall in Rockford, Illinois. We right now have 15 memorials up of people who were killed by law enforcement or died in custody of law enforcement. And we have one young man, Jovan Fresco, who was killed by paid security in Rockford, Illinois, rent-a-cops basically in Rockford, Illinois, who, because they were rent-a-cops, because they had connections to the police department, they were brought into the blue line aspect, and so they've been protected. And so it's been 6 years and they still have not stood trial for murdering Jovan Fresco after racially profiling him when they pulled him over in the area where they were securing. And one of the things you realize very quickly in Rockford, Illinois, is that people know the name of Trayvon Martin. People know the name of Michael Brown. People know the name of George Floyd. People know the name of Breonna Taylor and Sandra Bland and Philando Castile and Eric Garner. People don't know the names of Jovan Fresco. People don't know the name Logan Bell. Don't know the name Kerry Blake. Don't know the name Geno Washington. Don't know the name Mark Barmore. Don't know the name Philip Johnson. Don't know the name Suzette Babbler. Don't know the name Shannon Graves. Don't know the name Faustin Guaitigo. Don't know the name Mikey Guzman or Little Mike Sago or Eddie Patterson or Demetrius Bennett. And all of these people were killed by law enforcement or died in the custody of law enforcement. Or Joseph McCormick, who died in the custody of the Winnebago County Jail. And so we put those memorials up, put their pictures on poles, we put their names, the date they were killed on poles. We leave messages in chalk saying how they were killed, that they were killed by police, that they died in law enforcement custody. And that presents that information to everybody who walks in downtown Rockford. And now we've done the job of giving access to, we've done the job of gathering the information, and we've done the job of providing access to the information. And we can't control how people receive the information, and we've seen people receive this information in all types of ways. We've seen people tear the memorials down. The city of Rockford has torn the memorials down over 30 times in the close to 2 years since they've been up. We've seen people spray paint the memorials. And all of those things still are signs that the information is being received, that the information that is something that they, we put the information out in such a way that you can't turn away from it. And again, that gets back into the importance of how you present the information. And The same way that you have to understand that these issues and the people and institutions that perpetuate these issues that we're dealing with, that they do it in a psychological manner, that they take time to think about how people's minds are going to operate when, or how people may, they take time to think about how people will or won't react to certain things, and then they prey upon those things. We have to, in a sense, do the same thing. And so we have to take time to think about, how will people react to this information? What can we do to make it so people can't turn away from this information? What can we do to make sure the most amount of people can have access to this information? And then what will people do once we present the access to this information? What will people do once they can't turn away from this information?